Now, the background of this advice and this discussion is, of course, the policy of deportation, which was standard practice in 1930 as an essential piece of Canadian immigration policy. That is, that within the first 5 years after arrival of an immigrant, this person could be deported back to the country of origin if the person became unemployed, if he committed a crime, if the person became ill, and so on. In 1933, when of course many people were unemployed and had to take some kind of public assistance, 37% of immigrants were returned to the country of origin. This was an absolutely essential part of Canadian immigration policy. You must be able to send back the immigrants. So we have here a point which was really important for Blair, that the fact that these refugees had an unclear nationality, that their nationality could be taken from them by the German government, basically made it impossible for them to actually in some way consider them as immigrants. Now, in that sense, one can make a case for Blair, that he was a prudent civil servant and that he served his country well. Now, the question, of course, we have to ask, and I don't want to raise a large moral question now. Should he have had more imagination to resolve this? But let's move out of Canada for a moment and let's test Blair's attitude, his reasoning against international law. Does it make sense in terms of international law? And what Blair was constantly invoking was the issue of nationality. He said, when these people have a nationality, then in some way we can resolve it. But when they don't have a nationality, basically we can't deal with it. What is nationality? Now, basically nationality gives two things. Nationality is kind of different from citizenship. You know, I'm a Canadian citizen, so here in Canada I enjoy the privileges of citizenship. The moment that I leave Canadian soil and cross to the United States, France admit me because they know that they can always get rid of me again, because Canada has to take me. This is the central issue of nationality. I have a place to go back to. And this is not a very old understanding. It was really in international law. This idea of nationality only really came into full development fruition after the First World War. Before the First World War, nationality was less important, and certainly people were able to travel without passports all over the world. If you look at studies of international law and anecdotal evidence, for example, by Stefan Zweig, people could travel all around the world except to Persia and Russia without a passport before 1914. There was free travel. The earth was open to everyone, and this is the reason that the basically expulsion of 2 million Jews from Russia between 1881 and 1914 did not create a refugee crisis, because they could go somewhere else, because in fact there were hardly any border controls. 1914 changed everything. Basically the world, every state closed itself, the borders were closed. And this did not change after 1918, because after 1918, first of all, the world was in a continuous state of crisis, influenza epidemic, incredible unemployment, veterans coming home having no jobs, inflation, and of course the creation of the welfare state. The creation of the welfare state created a condition that actually citizenship started to create very particular benefits. And now work permissions for citizens became a common element of daily life. This was one part of the 1920s. The other one was an enormous amount of stateless people. More than 1 million Russians, exiles, were denationalized by the Soviet government. Hundreds of thousands of Armenians and Kurds were denationalized by the Turkish government. All over Europe, there were Hungarians living in Czechoslovakia, Hungarians living in Romania, Romanians living, you get the idea, every ethnic minorities in other states which did not fit the new citizenship rules of these states, and they were stateless. So statelessness, and by the other side of it, nationality, became an incredible focus of attention in the 1920s by scholars of international law. And most of the kind of opinions were created at that time. This was a big topic at the time. So when Blair in 1938 continues to come back to this problem of nationality, he is talking in the context of what is at that time a very fundamental debate, and which is an important debate. So the issue then becomes, what is a passport? And passports become very important in the 1920s, and what are we going to do with people who don't have a nationality? So one of the solutions that is created is a Nansen passport. Nansen, on behalf of the League of Nations, the polar explorer, basically takes on the role of High Commissioner of Refugees for the Russians and later the Armenians, and says we need to have some kind of identity document because these people have to travel to find work. Now, what is going to be the struggle about this identity document is that this identity document is going to be issued by states on behalf of the League, and the League cannot give nationality. So originally, in all of these discussions, is this idea, we need to, if somebody has a Nansen passport who is not a national, there still need to be a place where this person can be deported to. So this is at the time of the Turkish-Greek war, and they decide Constantinople will do. So Constantinople will become the garbage heap of the world in which all Nansen passport holders will be able to return if they're deported from the country where they reside. Of course, the Turks prevent that by taking control of Constantinople, and that in some way removes the kind of backing of this, the territorial backing of this passport. But by that time, the passport is already accepted, and in some way, people, but not Canada, Canada refuses to accept the Nansen passport because there is no right to return, because ultimately no sovereign state is backing it. In the late 1920s, continued discussions about creating identity papers by the League of Nations for stateless people or people who have uncertain nationality. And again, Canada every time comes back. And this is not Blair, these are predecessors. We cannot accept this because there is no right to return. Then in 1933, the German refugee crisis starts. And so what are we going to do with these people? Basically, civil servants and politicians from all over the world are basically asking this question: what kind of papers will they have? They are leaving Germany with German passports, but it's very clear that basically the effective right of return doesn't exist anymore because the German government makes clear that these people cannot come back. So they're not deportable. So a new situation is now created in international, because officially these people are still German nationals, but de facto they're stateless. Something which throughout the 1920s nobody even had thought this was possible. So in 1933, in 1934, in 1935, a lot of discussions are being created in the League of Nations. A High Commissioner for German Jewish refugees appointed, Mr. MacDonald, an American, and all of the effort is focused on this idea of this identity document. And all the focus in the identity document is on this one single question: can it carry a right of return? To where? So finally in 1936, the document is finished. Some 10 nations sign on to it, and it has, okay, the right of a nation will give this document, this certificate, for these refugees, and this refugee may return to the country that gave it. So when you found yourself in Belgium in 1936, the Belgian government, on behalf of the League, issues the document. You can always go back to Belgium. But the problem is right now that the document itself has only a one-year validity, and that there's no obligation of the representative, in this case the Belgian consul, let's say in Ottawa, to renew it. Which means that the 5-year rule the Canadian government has, in which it wants to deport people, and the one-year validity of this document don't match. So the refugee falls between the cracks.